you would be willing to write your name and your email so we can send you further notifications of other events. I'm sorry. That's right. All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Morgenstern?
You're much older than you.
Why don't we get started? My name is Robert Platt, and I'm so pleased to have with me today Professor Richard Bensel in the government department, and he actually teaches a class on conservative thought. And to my right and your left is Professor Randy Wayne, who's in the Integrated School of Plant Sciences, but he runs the local chapter of the Heterodox Academy, which is a faculty group that looks into diversity of viewpoint and so on. And before we start, I just want to make a quick plug for Cornellians United for Free Speech. And we are a group dedicated to freedom of expression, academic freedom, viewpoint diversity, and due process. And we've been around now really organizing all this school year. And right now we don't have membership dues. We're very free-flowing, and students, faculty, staff, and alumni are all welcome to join. I thought we should talk about several different things today in terms of what are the free speech challenges facing Cornell. I gave a talk on this on February 1, and things haven't really changed all that much, even though a lot of water has fallen over the dam since then. Basically, we have the real problem of the challenges posed by the Gaza crisis, and the fact that instead of targeting everyone's focus upon the issues and the exchange of ideas in recent discussions and in academic sort of detachment, we ended up getting into sort of a bullying or blackmail situation, like I will do X until you agree with me, kind of thing, which is more like temper tantrum than persuasion. That has culminated now in a report that was just released on May 31, written by 8 experts from outside the immediate university, led by the famous Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman. There's also Stephen Israel, who's also a congressman, someone who is general counsel to the National Council of Reformed Judaism, a Mideast scholar. It's a very eclectic but well-respected group of people, and they've come up with 9 recommendations. But their basic recommendation is we should emphasize free speech. We should emphasize the university as a table upon which all ideas can be debated, and that the emphasis has to be on communicating and persuading individuals rather adopting official positions and then imposing upon anybody who disagrees with it. We got to increase the amount of discussion and debate rather than clamp down on the amount of discussion and debate. And I think that's the right solution. So we'll see whether those recommendations get implemented. President Pollock, in her statement on the 31st, said that both she and the incoming acting president, Michael Koplikoff, agree with them. So we'll see where that goes. The next problem, which is very, very difficult, is the Title IX regulations, which have been finalized by the Biden administration. And these contain many provisions which experts agree threaten free speech on campus, not because sexual harassment or rape is a matter of free speech, but rather whether people can talk about Title IX proceedings without being censored is the free speech issue there. There was a famous Title IX case involving a physics professor, and the Sun ran extensive coverage, and under the new regs, the Sun even writing a story about it would be a Title IX violation. So you can't have censorship. And the third controversy, which is very esoteric, only a lawyer can love, is the fact that in 1969, after the Strait takeover, the state legislature passed something called the Henderson Law, which required each university, private or public in New York State, to adopt something called the Rules for Maintenance of Public Order, which it sounds like exactly what you think it sounds like. And they must file these with the state, refile them once every 10 years on July 1st. And then every year in between, file an affidavit with the state government promising that they're in effect and are really following. And this was, I happened to help write them in 1970. This is now in doubt because the trustees did something very ambiguous on December 10th, 2020, where they sort of split it up between faculty and students, and no one knows what happened to the faculty part of it. And so now on July 1, Cornell's gonna have to lay its cards on the table and actually take a wheelbarrow full of paper and hand it to the New York State Department of Education saying, these are our rules for maintenance of public order, and these are our procedures for enforcing those rules. The other thing that's very erosive of that is that the graduate students, rightly or wrongly, decided to, in an election, to recognize a union. And the union contends that disciplinary stuff and a lot of other stuff are stuff that they can bargain upon, collectively bargain upon, and they can file grievances through the union about. So the question is, if, for whatever definition, you perform a misconduct that violates the rules for maintenance of public order, what procedure do you go through to handle that? Do you go to the union shop steward, or do you go to the judicial administrator? And this is something that they're fighting out on. So those are the issues as I know it. Richard, do you want to add a few? I know you know a lot more about academic freedom than I ever do, but please just tell us what's on top of your mind.
Well, one of the things that most concerns me, and I think are the Department of Government, and we are kind of a thorn in the side of the central administration on free speech, and they're not very popular. For that reason. One of the things that most concerns us is finding a way to separate out the substance of political issues from the right to speak to them. And I've been here long enough to see the university go through several stages. I think the one in which political correctness, what you could say, that's turned out over the years, for some reasons, to get much better. Bob was saying, I teach a course in American conservative thought. It's a small seminar. I get students from all over the university. It's the only one on conservative thought. This is one of the problems with having a debate on political issues. Is it's very difficult when one side is so loaded with the others. But it is the course that is taught. No other course like it. But anyway, it's my seismic. Kids come in. They come in with all kinds of persuasions. It's really a mix. Third of the conservative, third of the liberal. Don't know. Some of them are Jewish and Orthodox conservatives. Some of them are Catholic and Orthodox. I get some Randians coming in. Not Randy, but Randians coming in, and they're atheists. And they're anyway. It's a real meeting place, and we've never had a fight. We've had discussions, but it's my seismograph. And so over the years, I've learned that it's not that they can say, conservatives can say more things in other classes. There's still social pressure. But they don't feel like they're going to be punished. That's different. That is a good thing. I do feel, however, that, and as we saw in the last year, there's been a real problem with Palestinian and Israeli conflict. And separating out, that's been very difficult in our it's very difficult in the university to separate out the substance from the spirit. One of the things that Bob is bringing up, I think is very important to see or to recognize. The central administration plays politics. It's a game in which they maintain a constituency in the faculty among the students that allows them to replay that position. So you see this in the way that the first N Coulter presentation was disrupted. I was the chair of the codes committee for the University Assembly at the time, and I asked this strange thing, so you know who these people are. They were televised, disrupting the talk and so forth, and their names were taken down. I said, well, what did you do? And she wouldn't tell me. So I learned sleight of hand, not sleight of hand, but roundabout, that nothing much was done to that disruption, even though it's very serious. It is directly speaker related, shutting down. But she wouldn't tell me, and I suspected it, and I think there's some evidence that there was just a slap on the wrist. Then we come to the encampment, which I think was really well behaved. It didn't shut down anybody. I mean, there were a few people who went outside the encampment and did bad things, but inside the encampment, it was very quiet, very well disciplined. The university comes along and suspends 4 students,
Six people.
six people, and broadcasts it to the world. And I find that hypocrisy really, really bothersome. And it is a tilting, it is a management of the public sphere that is a university. It is a management of it politically that I think is a real problem.
Because it's not content neutral.
It's not content neutral, but it also can change focus. I mean, it's just from our point of I can speak from our point of view. It is the Department of Government and a small handful of us. The rest of the department is okay with this. Most colleagues, most faculty say, yeah, but I got to do my research. And they're not opposed to it, but they're not activists. But those of us who have been active, we're looking ahead. So looking ahead, we think that the political correctness thing right now is not solved, but it's more dormant than it's been in 10 years, than the last 10 years. The Palestinian-Israeli thing, I hope this gets done before the fall. But in any case, it would be wrong to focus on that as the major thing thinking 5 years out where the university wants to be. I think the real problem is going to be the university's willingness to go along with outside government interference on the university. Let me give you an example, and then I'll be done. Sure, have to see what's to do. But there's been this thing. New York State did this thing 2 years, 957 days ago. This thing. There was a questionnaire. And it was on sexual harassment. And you're supposed to take this video, this training video, and then at the end, you're supposed to take a questionnaire. This is for faculty.
Yes.
And so they sent it out to all the faculty, and I said, I asked them, what happens if you don't pass the questionnaire test? Is why do you take it again? And I said, well, what happens if you fail again? Then you take it again. And I said, yeah, I can't do that. And I said, did Governor Cuomo, because he signed this thing into law. I said, did he take this test? And if he passed, did it make any difference? And they wouldn't answer that. So I refused to do it. The reason I know it's 907 days ago is because last spring in the semester, they asked me again to take this thing. I don't know, somehow the clock wound around and they said, oh, let's ask him again. And I refused again. But this kind of thing, that's coming from the left, but it looks to me like it's really McCarthyite. It's like, are you now? Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? There is the same kind, and you can't say the Fifth Amendment. I couldn't say the Fifth Amendment. It would be appropriate or something. But this kind of resistance, this is the kind of that and the centralization of this power in the central administration. Just on these two things are really changing nature. They're eating away at the kind of autonomy, respect, difference, the of opinion, and to me, but
Yeah, Nick, do you want to flip it over?
that's it. I can say a lot more about
Okay, well, we'll
the
say that,
trenches, but
we'll say that for questions. Randy, do you want to tell us about the Heterodox Academy and some of the important things you've achieved and how you've tried to build viewpoint diversity on campus?
So the Heterodox Academy, Bensel, Heterodox Academy is a group of faculty and some graduate students. It was set up actually as a way to build trust and social capital among people that, frankly, there's no trust anywhere. But if you go along with what everybody says, it's never a question. But if you want to say something different, then it's a question. So I wanted to provide a place that people felt that they could build trust. We could build trust, and also social capital, because you don't get invited to the good parties if you speak. That's the cost. That's basically the cost. And Heterodox Academy gives us $3,000. So initially, I spent that week getting pretty good breakfasts for us to meet at Wednesdays and 8 in the morning. But $3,000 doesn't go that far. We decided to bring in a program. So by and thanks to Bob, he gave me the confidence by the donation. They just gave me the confidence till this day. So running.
But the point is they brought in speakers from out of the campus.
So brought in. I'll say the people that people probably know: Matt Taibbi and Greg Luciana, and Ricky Schlott, and Gad Sad, and Elia Shapiro, Marianne Franks, Kathleen Stock. So to create a place where people are talking about free speech specifically or somewhat unpopular issues. And the programs have been great. The turnouts have been horrible because not only are people afraid to speak, but they're afraid to listen. And I asked Ann Coulter if she had paid Professor Cornell for interrupting her, because Professor Cornell truly made Ann's point.
Yes.
And she didn't. She said she did.
The point was that Ann Coulter came twice, once in November of 22 and again in April of 24. And she was specifically invited back to sort of prove that the cancel culture that had caused her to be disrupted the first time, we had overcome that. And everything went fine until the question and answer session, and the third question was from a assistant professor of English.
Of interpersonal relationships.
And she, instead of asking a question, gave a speech, and then they went on to the next question. And then she proceeded to shout racist, racist, whenever Anne said anything further, and gave Anne the finger and all that. So he was forced to leave the audience by the Cornell police. So there are two different Anne Coulter episodes here. And the question we all want to know, and no one does know, is what consequences were there for this non-tenured professor who decided to call the entire audience, which included the dean of the law school, the provost, faculty, senior faculty, even lowly me. We were all racist in her view, and she told us that in no uncertain terms.
Which goes to the point that if you even show up to hear anybody's opinion that isn't approved opinion, you'll be called whatever it is, racist, transphobic, or whatever. So people know that, so they know not to show up. I think actually, our biggest thing in terms of what Richard said is a university has no principles. And it just, so whatever the politics has no principles, and that's what we're basing our foundation. And so we really have to say, this is our purpose. And to divide it into a dichotomy, Jonathan Haidt says the purpose is either the search for truth, which requires free speech to get things right, or it's social justice, which depends on the political wins. Martha Pollack has run it as if social justice is our keynote. I think we have to make sure that Mike Kotlikov does not run Cornell as if social justice is our keynote.
Right, and it gets a little more refined than that. I mean, we could all sit down and write a group of mutually agreed upon rules for conduct. Like don't shout fire in a crowded theater, stuff like that.
Unless it's on fire.
Right, but so even if we do that, the two other problems. One problem is like who decides and enforces those rules, and how much buy-in from the community is there to that enforcement? Because obviously there's no problem with the mundane stuff like public drunkenness or the other things that might happen on campus. The problem comes in when you try to regulate free speech, or if you over-regulate free speech, you have something called a chilling effect, which destroys things like academic freedom. And so then it becomes who decides. And what we decided after the crisis following the Strait was we're going to have an independent judicial thing. We're going to have hearing panels, and they were going to make a decision. In a few cases, they've done something called jury nullification, where they said, look, I know you brought this person up on charges, the Sun reporter or whatever. We're not going to convict them. We don't think that that's a violation. But the point was, just like the freedom of me as a citizen is in the hands of the jury, right? I can go around being as outspoken as I am because I know no jury would convict me of a crime for saying that. If the system is bound up with Day Hall or any other political process, then it calls into question, your freedom, your academic freedom, and the whole thing gets mushed up. And the thing that I found most surprising was when you read the 7 demands of the encampment, 1/7 was, we want amnesty. So, on day one of the protests, their first thing they said was, well, we want amnesty. Because like they were on the one hand saying, well, we know we're going to get a lot of trouble for doing this, for engaging in civil disobedience. On the other hand, we don't want to pay any price for civil disobedience. So they were sort of expecting a cost-free civil disobedience, which isn't really the tradition for civil disobedience. But again, the idea that you can negotiate amnesty is very troubling, because either you've broken the rules or you haven't broken the rules. And that should happen and be applied whether you have a lot of political power or you don't. The rules apply as much to Ezra Cornell IV as they do to the president of the university, as they do to the first semester freshman. You all abide by the same rules, and you all have to trust the system of hearing panel members to give you a fair trial. And it shouldn't be a matter of administrative fiat as to whether you're guilty or innocent. They might say, well, we're going to bring you up on charges or whatever, but it shouldn't be controlled by Day Hall. It should be in the hands of your peers.
Okay. Let me add something to that. Civil disobedience is a calculation. And you calculate the punishment against affirming your values, your principles, and so forth. In order to do that in a free institution, you have to know what the punishment is. You have to know what the calculation. That you can't find out, somewhere along the line in an act of civil disobedience, oh, we're going to slap your wrist, or we're going to suspend you. You should know this ahead of time. Otherwise, you cannot participate. Civil disobedience is basically to say, I care strongly enough about this to take that risk. But you have to know what that risk is. And what happens with the university is they refuse to say. That's the reason why the suspensions, which were outside of due process altogether, when the suspensions for the encampment were so many people were killed for. It came down as an act of fiat, in which those who participated had no idea that was going to be the punishment. But in general, this is something the universities refuse to do. It is, in addition to having due process and the hearings and so forth and so on, in addition to having those, you have to know what the punishment is. And it shouldn't be so high that you discourage all acts of civil disobedience. That's part of speech.
But it shouldn't be so low that you think you're engaging in a costly situation. And this is not just encampments or stuff that makes the front page of the New York Times. I would argue that when you look at the way Cornell regulates fraternities or sports teams regarding their conduct, it's the same equation. And it's not an act of civil disobedience, but the fact that suspension just comes down magically and arbitrarily is troubling to many people. Well, does anyone from the audience have questions? We're trying to be provocative, but not indoctrinating here. Anybody have a question at all? Yes, Nick.
So I guess I'll start with a little bit of a comment, and I guess in the judicial legal system, the way that this is addressed is largely by public precedent. Would that be kind of inaccurate?
Well,
And then what does Cornell allow in terms of precedents, and what does they publish? And
so what happened was that there is case law in the criminal courts. So like, what is an unreasonable search and seizure? Or what is a burglary tool, for the definition of the difference between burglary and merely larceny, okay? And in some cases, a big flashlight might be a burglary tool. When the judicial system was established in 1970 by the University Senate, we specifically provided for case law and have it be available for people to research. And there were these sort of public defenders from the law school who kept very close track of that. One of the worst things that happened with the transition on December of 2020 was they abolished all that. We even suggested, let's carry that forward. And they said, no, we don't want to have. And their rationale, believe it or not, was we want a system that is more educational and less punitive. Yet what they do is they put people in the position of like plea bargaining. And the person who's plea bargaining doesn't know what his chances are of conviction, because he's not allowed to know what the precedent is or what the case law is. So I think before you can have a meaningful diversion system or alternative dispute resolution system, you must have due process in the underlying. I want to take this to hearing. I want to fight City Hall all the way. You know, you have to have those rights solid in due process before you can consider other fancy things like alternative dispute resolution. And we have had cases. There were 2 cases involving fraternities last year where students were suspected of drugging a woman with what they call roofies or Rohypnol. And they spent a year investigating those 2 cases, and they couldn't prove anything, but they kept the houses under suspension for 12 months. Finally, the 1-year statute of limitations ran. And then they called them and said, look, we can't prove that, but we found these 2 other technical violations. So we're going to punish you for those. You know, so it's so outrageous. You know, justice delayed is justice denied. And you see the same thing here, that I hope they get these 6 suspension cases resolved quickly. I'd hate to have them go over into the fall semester, right? So the answer to your question is, precedents are very important under the old system, and they're not allowed under the current system. That's your answer. Any other question?
No, I thought Martha did email us saying that they were warned they would be suspended if they didn't leave by a certain time.
Yeah,
So it wasn't like policy, it ad hoc, at least the day before.
well, but again, you know, who is they? So Cornell has a dual system where we punish the organizations and we punish the members of the organization. The women's track team got into some misconduct, and they elected to punish the women's track team members as individuals and not the track team itself. Lacrosse team got into problems a few years before that. They punished the lacrosse team and not the individual member. And if you are in fact a member of the Coalition for Mutual Liberation, is it the Coalition for Mutual Liberation is going to get suspended? They did suspend Climate Justice Cornell because they were the ones who filed for the permit to use the art squad. But you know, you get into this whole thing about, do you just punish the leaders? Do you punish everybody? Sometimes it's very clear. When Stanford University 13 protesters took over the president's office, they scooped them up and they processed all 13 co-equally, whether one was the leader or the follower. So there is this sort of like, who is they that is going to be suspended?
So is your objection then that only the leaders were suspended, or that they were suspended without a policy that says can't be?
I think there were 2 issues. One was they announced the punishment without due process, meaning usually you find out whether somebody's guilty or not before you punish them. And you go through the process, but they didn't do that. They announced and that was one part. The other part, as Bob was pointing to, there were a lot of people in that camp. And you know, if you're going to, what is your, even in a well-constructed judicial system, if you're going to have a distinction between leaders and followers, you should say that. They were very careful, by the way, this coalition. I wasn't part of that. Substantively, I disagree. So I was not part of that. But I was on their mailing list, and they consulted me every once in a while on the free speech issues. And in doing that, they were very careful to say, we have leaders. Right. And so the designation of leaders by the university was in fact something that the coalition itself had denied. Now that's not, it's like saying, we don't have a leader here, we have Bob.
But the point was that some of them had volunteered to go and quote negotiate with the administration, and those were the people who were targeted. So you run into that sort of problem with labor unions. The other thing which is very difficult is, if you look at this history of the civil rights movements in the 1960s, there were incidences of mass arrest, right? I mean, the problem in Selma wasn't the fact that Martin Luther King was walking from Selma to Birmingham. The fact was he brought like 1,000 people with him, you know, and it is an acceptable political tactic to engage in mass action. I mean, you know, hopefully the mass action is all legal, but if it's a mass action of civil disobedience, the sort of the moral counterpoint to that is you have to have mass arrest and mass due process, and you can't just pick 5 out of the barrel or something, or 6. You know, if in fact 20 people violated the law, you should process all 20 of them. Now, in terms of summary disposition, even from 1970, we reserved a very narrow exception that if there was real life and danger and so on, that the president did have the right to ban someone temporarily from campus and suspend them and so on. But this right for suspension pending the hearing, or what they call interim remedies, was on the condition that it was the least restrictive alternative available. So, for example, the president could have said, not that you are suspended, but that I'm hereby getting a court injunction forbidding you from going near the arts. You could still go to class, you could still go in the dorm, it's just that you can't go to the arts. That's the least restrictive alternative. And that's literally what it says they should do, but they don't. And what is your remedy if they do? You can appeal to the vice president, Ryan Lombardi, and if it involves classes, the provost. So if in fact you're the appellate person, Ryan Lombardi, what's the first thing that's incumbent upon you? Don't go there, don't be the man on the scene, because you're the appellate person. Yet there were time again, 6 times this semester where Ryan Lombardi was the man on the scene in Carmen Hall, ready to decide whether the protest got to the point where we have to call the police or not. He was the one talking to the leaders, you know, and how can you on the one hand be that actor, and on the other hand be the appellate body? Yes.
So let's assume, let's give Cornell the benefit of the doubt and say that they were caught flat-footed. They were completely surprised. I don't know how they could have been since it's been going on for a long time. And let's say that Cornell, as of now, it doesn't sound like they have a strict code of conduct. Sounds like they just have this amorphous, because I think we read what their codes were, and they're very amorphous. Nobody really knows what they mean when they're implemented. Let's say they don't have a list of consequences for specific crimes, like, you know, in law, you rob a bank. These are the penalties, from 1 year to 3 years. If you murder somebody, it's from 10 years to life or whatever. So let's assume that Cornell has really tried their best, whether you think successfully or not. What do you predict is happening while we're here in those offices to try to head off what could be starting again? Because I don't think this war in Israel is going to be over.
Right,
in
okay,
September.
so the 9 recommendations that Elizabeth Holtzman's group came up with, and those are largely try to do more team building and strength and freshman orientation and stuff like that. But there's another group that's revising the interim expressive activity policy, which is the protest policy. My grievance was we had one that was time tested, that was in effect until November 10th, 2020, that was blessed by the community, and then unilaterally it was disrupted and repealed, at least for the students. We don't know yet for the faculty, we've got to find out. And the fact that they put in all this ambiguity, and the fact that they use the pretext of, we want this to be educational, not punitive. You see, I personally, I mean, I don't want Cornell to be a terribly punitive place, and I want Cornell to be educational, but I personally question when it comes down to regulating conduct in a very highly politicized environment with big consequences, whether that is a slogan that results in very squishy approach that's ineffective.
So are they doing something to improve their reactions in terms of action, reactions and consequences? I'm not hearing that they are. I'm just hearing that it's still going to be this wishy-washy. Maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that, instead of a strict guideline telling the kids what the consequences are if they do something. As you said, if you don't know what the consequence is, you're gonna take your chances.
Right, and I agree with you. All I can say is, and again, nobody in this room knows the answer to your very important question. But, you know, the president is retiring in 3 weeks. The provost will be acting president for 2 years. And I'm not entirely convinced in my own mind that the two of them were completely aligned in terms of their approach. So all I can tell is wait and see. And it could be that the provost, who will become the acting president, will be just as effective or not as Martha Pollock. And we just don't know. We have to see. But at least there's that change.
This is a very difficult point for Cornell, period. It's in some kind of, and we don't know the total state of the university. But it seems to be an acute, at least an acute financial crisis that has led to major and continuing major changes in many of the fundamental institutions in the university. I'm director of graduate studies for my department. I see it firsthand in the way that many of the doctoral programs are going to be cut back. And as you're cutting those back, you're cutting back the lifeblood of any university. They run at a loss. The president is president. Oh God, I think has been a major advocate for cutting back on these programs. And these are going to be very painful. So the issues, I hope the Palestinian thing is done by the fall. I do think that if it's not done, you're right, it's going to come back and it's going to be a major issue. Problem for the university, though, is that it is managing this crisis that is going to impact. The reason why it's 2 years and not 1 year for an acting president is that the dirty work, this is our guess, the dirty work is going to be done by Kolakov before they bring in a new president. That's the way you would run a corporation. That's the way they're going to run the university. So the next year, at least, I think, is going to be very, very painful for the university and for major elements of the university have nothing to do with the Palestinian crisis or anything else. There's going to be squelching other kinds of protests, complaints about the way the university is organized, what it's going to be in the long run. I think the Palestinian thing is going to be distracting. In some ways, it's almost a godsend to a president in crisis to have to deal publicly with that while they're doing many other things that are even more fundamental to the future of the university. And they're almost done in the quiet because you're dealing as we did in the spring. The spring, we dealt with the encampment, we dealt with the interim program, we dealt with the Russell Rickford incident in the fall. These things are almost a godsend to a university that is at the same time, if everything were placid, we'd really be complaining about the doctoral programs and the future of the humanities in the university.
Can you explain what the risk is to those financial crisis that we're in?
That the available funds are insufficient to keep on going at the level we've been going. And that what funds are available will be, misallocated in some people's view at the expense of others.
So from the perspective of a 60-year now alumni of Cornell. The university has been receiving annually more money in contributions each year than ever before.
Yeah.
And, right, and so you add to that the money from Qatar and elsewhere, as well as government funding. What's happened? Okay,
Well, I will play devil's advocate, and I do not have the full truth, but I will play devil's advocate. One is, we've been having Bundy aid since the early 1960s from the state of New York. This is the first year we got zeroed out in the budget, and the budget was adopted right when, you know, Columbia, NYU, and Cornell were hitting the fan.
gotcha.
Okay, Cornell Giving Day this year was less than Cornell Giving Day from last year. More donors, but less dollars. There are major donors at other universities that have publicly threatened to withhold donations. And Cornell has a classy enough alumni relations scheme that we kept those sort of discussions from being public, but I have no idea what private messages were sent.
And I can tell you from the alumni side, they were harsh and hard and appropriately so, but we're talking about 1 year now. I mean, I can understand you say this year was bad, but it seems from our perspective, it's an anomalous situation this past year.
Okay, but the anonymous situation is that we had a capital campaign that's going to go through 2026. And it is extremely anomalous to have a university president resign in the middle of a campaign. But you know, after June 30, when they close the books and they announce the totals for the year, you and I will have a much more enlightened conversation. But let's focus more on free speech.
No, I understand it. I didn't want to sidetrack. I agree with you.
Yeah, okay, but let's focus on free speech, because, you know, I really believe that if you have an empowered faculty, if you have a good environment for academic, meaningful discussions and debates, and you have a certain amount of transparency from day one, you can work through almost any problem. You know, I mean, problems are very tough, but there's a path to work through them. The question becomes, over the next 2 years, whether transparency, equanimity can be maintained to whatever the challenge is, you know, march forward in an optimal way.
No, I think that's right. The broader point I'm making, though, my own view is the crisis is going to be a real problem. But the point is, looking forward down the line, 5 years from now, you have to think about the kinds of policies, long-term policies, programs, reforms that would maintain the university as an open forum. That's the worry I have. And this worry about the crisis, I think in part, you know, this is what Malakoff said about the new campus. Title IX, there are congressmen in Washington that are threatening to take the way. I said, what? They can't take the way. Either few congressmen. But the sensitivity about funding, which is what he was citing, that sensitivity is what makes Cornell particularly bold in ways that we talk about what's going to affect their strategy, their response, and so forth and so on. I think that vulnerability is one that makes them acutely political.
Where do you think the biggest problem is? The administration, the faculty, or the students? Because I see it basically as well, it's chicken or egg. The faculty is in one sense canceled if they do things, and you said politically correctness is kind of passe, but I'm sure there are certain areas where it is not passe. So they don't have the freedom of expression. On the other hand, some of them have the freedom to distort history, to single out students, to make an uncomfortable environment in their classroom, which again is the yin and yang of free speech versus censorship. So somehow somebody has to take lead. And again, is it the administration? Is it the faculty? I think the least responsible are the students, because the students will do what they are allowed to do within the framework of they want to just get their education. They want to be expressing what they're feeling, but they, I'm sure, would prefer to do it within the bounds of the code of conduct, let's say.
This give you another example. We have an involvement in China, and it's very lucrative. You know, Cornell makes a good deal of money, and we have statements on academic freedom. They're pretty good statements. The problem is they don't apply at all to classrooms in China where we teach. In fact, sometimes they don't even apply to classrooms at Cornell. And the reason they don't is because the People's Republic has people who will report on their nationals back to the government. Question is, how we're in this deep. We can't pull out. I mean, Cornell could not pull out of China without losing tens of millions of dollars. Right? Not only for the students here, but in terms of grants and so forth for those programs in the global. Yeah, where would you start? And that's the problem that you can't start with the central administration because they feel their hands are tied. The China initiative, as they call it, and I've dealt with this for years through the faculty senate, but the China initiative is sacrosanct. I mean, the faculty senate has ruled over and over again. Tell us about freedom of speech in China. Tell us what's going on there. And we said, you know, why is this involvement expanding at the very top point that China is becoming more totalitarian, and that the students and the activities of the Chinese government in other universities, particularly in Australia, but also in the United States, have become more active. They can't do anything. They're not going to do anything about it.
Even if students protest, even if faculty protest.
That's right. We passed the faculty senate. We've passed it over and over again. Until you come before us and have those programs approved, we don't think they should be continued. That was passed by the faculty senate, and they ignored it. Faculty have there's no way for the faculty to take those steps that constrain the central administration.
Even if they're provided for in the university bylaws.
Yep.
Where is a board of trustees?
Well, that's very interesting. And as you know, we have a 63-member board. There are probably about, like, I think 15 people on the executive committee. The board only meets 4 times a year. The executive committee meets monthly. Obviously the chair of the board is in constant communication with the president. And it becomes very difficult. There are the governor and a whole bunch of other state officials on the board. There are now 8 alumni elected trustees, 2 student elected trustees, 2 faculty elected trustees, 1 employee elected trustee. And it's really very closely held, much more so than when I was on the board. They really put a premium on controlling the message. After every trustee meeting, there used to be a press conference. So people would talk about what the board did at that meeting. They abolished that. They don't even put out press releases in the chronicles, or they dribble them out over the following months. You know, they used to issue quarterly reports on the status of the endowment earnings and so on. they haven't issued one of those for like over a year. So things are much more tightly controlled. It used to be that you had Cornell Sun reporters rabble rousing and asking embarrassing questions of everybody on campus. And now everybody says no comment, I'm not supposed to talk to the Sun or any other media for that matter. So things are much more tightly held. So if you really want to know what's going on at Day Hall or the Board of Trustees, you need to get like electronic microscope or CIA spying apparatus to eavesdrop on their meetings. You can't just do it reading the pages of the Sun or the pages of the Chronicle anymore. It's a real challenge. It's a real difference in environment than it was 50 years ago.
Let me ask a question. What would you recommend that alumni do?
Are you asking me or are you asking this Morgan?
We're asking
Yeah,
you.
yeah, they have.
Okay, well, I
If
mean,
we knew what we could do.
right. So I think that
We're doing it.
forming groups like Cornellians for Free Speech is very appropriate. I think we should have a reform of the campaign rules for student, faculty, alumni, trustees to allow a debate of the issues. Right now, one of my classmates ran for trustee this spring, and another group sent out a mass email endorsing him. And he was in a panic because he said, oh, that's a violation of the election rules, and had to beg the guy to send out a second email revoking his endorsement. I mean, that is not what the rules say, but that's the way the administration implement the rules. 2 years ago, they asked all the candidates standard questions. The one question said, diversity is very important at Cornell. What are you going to do as a trustee to enhance diversity? And then at the same time, which was allowed by the rule, the president of the alumni IFT sent a questionnaire, all the questions and candidates and offered to print the full results to all the members of the IFC alumni saying, Greek life is very important to us. What are you going to do to enhance Greek life? Which was sort of a mirror image question. And the university instructed all the trustee candidates not to respond. Even though it was fair to all four candidates. So you've got to have a better campaign rules for that. I think that what's going to happen is no matter what they file on July 1, and I hope they file something wonderful with the state of New York, there's going to be goof ups on the rules for maintenance of public order, and then there will probably be Article 78 proceedings challenging those. There'll probably be Article 78 proceedings challenging some of the other judicial things. These are very rapid, sort of summary judgment kind of proceedings that don't involve full discovery or a trial. So I think there's going to be more litigation. I think that there's going to be more at Columbia. There were lawsuits by the Jewish students alleging anti-Semitism. There were complaints filed by a lot of people at the Department of Justice and the Department of Education alleging Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. So we're going to have a more litigious mess, and it's up to the alumni to decide to what extent they want to get engaged with that or cheer that on or poo-poo or boo it or whatever. It's going to be sort of like going to a football game and watching the various teams march up and down the fields.
Cornell, the DEI, Pledge of Allegiance to DEI.
Why don't you answer that?
No,
Are you sure?
I've never.
the medical school, does the medical school have that?
That's, of course, downstate, so I don't know what's going on.
But
You're saying for
I think the question is,
No,
when there's a faculty position
Or-
posted
For
now,
applicants.
do you file a DEI statement? I think that's what.
For applicants, for faculty applicants.
That's a
To be
good question.
hired.
We don't read them.
Oh, Chef says, they have to in the engineering school, but he goes to see, because you get to see how many people read them,
Yes.
and nobody does. In our school, School of Integrated Plant Science, they request DEI statements
from the applicant.
from the applicants. And,
Faculty or students?
faculty. And, actually, we have 4 associate directors, 1 for research, 1 for teaching, 1 for extension, dealing with farm issues and things like that. Guess which one's involved in hiring and tenure promotion?
I forgot the floor.
I didn't say it, because it would have been so obvious, DEI.
The deputy department head for DEI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't
like
have to
an
be
HR.
qualified for anything, right?
Right, but the problem is that, you know, particularly as salary lines become so scarce, you know, there's not a lot more professors being added, not that many more endowed professorships. So hiring new faculty is very constrained. And President Pollock instituted this weird system whereby there's an incentive pool of, I think it was $60 million. And so if you are a department head, you say, I need to hire another professor, you know, things are really rough here. And we'll say to you, I'm sorry, there's no money for another salary line for your department. But we have this other incentive fund here, and if you make a diversity hire, we can fund it out of that. Or we can fund the salary for the spouse of the person you want to lure to Cornell. We'll give them an administrative job and we'll fund the administrative job out of that. So there's money available. And of course, where did that money come from? That money was created by decreasing the increase in the regular faculty pool and diverting it into the separate diversity hire.
This has changed quite a bit, though. I mean, that
Okay.
year before, yeah, 2022, when we were making graduate student applicants, we were ordered by the university to record their ethnicity, race, and their sexual orientation.
The people that were hired and the people that applied.
The people applied, but we were also quotas so much, but we were supposed to overrepresent. Now that was all of 2022. With the Supreme Court decision, though, in 2023, all of it was eliminated. So that there were, in fact, on the applications, you won't see that information. It's still there. There's still diversities that
There's an essay. There's an essay.
a personal essay, and in which, you know, applicants will indicate, often indicate, sometimes they will indicate their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or sometimes it's in the choice of areas of study. So it's not visible sometimes, but the overt recording is gone, and that's a real change from past practice. It was really heavy.
Of course, the thing we don't know is that there was this very bright man who was the vice provost for enrollment, you know, essentially admissions and financial aid. And he was very active. He was on a lot of national panels and everything. He was very prominent in setting up the task force to study Supreme Court thing and so on. And then all of a sudden, like in February, he disappeared. And all of a sudden, Vice Provost Neely, I think that's how you pronounce her name, she was acting in that capacity. And the university's never explained why this person left. He did appear in a couple of public panel discussions and conferences after that, introduced as the former head of admissions and financial aid for Cornell. But till this date, no matter how hard I've dug, no one has even confided in me what happened to him.
There's another, you're asking what faculty could do. One of the things, I'm active in the American Association of University Professors as well, the AUP. And one of their mission statements is, in fact, academic freedoms are very aggressive. They often do very good things. I've been a member now 5 years. I was vice president of the chapter and so forth. One of the things and I do not favor this, but this is where they're going. They cite violations of academic freedom, freedom of speech, faculty autonomy as a reason to unionize the faculty. I'm opposed to that because I don't like organization. I think it's trading one form of autonomy for another, so I don't support it. I'm still a member. They not support their unionization. But they're going to push on this. And their argument is going to be, in part, a response to your question. What can we do? Well, individually, it's very, very difficult. We unionize, you have shop stewards and so forth and so on. And it turns academic freedom into
A labor negotiation.
Yeah, labor negotiation, like Bob was talking about with the graduate student union. This is a problem. And to my mind, it's a problem. But I think that's a possible response. And I think that's something you might see in the next couple of years.
And it might be with different people in Day Hall that asserting faculty autonomy would be more popular. That it goes in cycles. Okay, so other questions or? All right, well, I'll just summarize. One is I really hope you do get involved in Cornellians United for Free Speech. And I think if nothing else, we can bring more visibility to some of these issues. We may not solve them. We certainly aren't going to storm the president's office and sit in until our demands are met. But it's just a matter of elevating the level of discussion and the sophistication of the discussion, which quite honestly has not been very sophisticated in the past 5 years. Getting more better campaign rules and more substance to the debate on the trustee elections, I think would be great. I think the Heterodox Academy, just even getting people into the room and inviting controversial people is very important. I do think that my personal preference, and I know you took the conversation very much sort of over into the DEI space, is to keep the free speech argument separate from the DEI argument, so that when a DEI issue arises in a way that tramples upon free speech rights, then we can speak as an observer saying, regardless of how you feel about the DEI issue, this has to be handled in a very protective way of free speech of all the viewpoints. And if you jump in and say, I think side A is right, or I think side B is right, then you lose the authoritative voice on, regardless of how you feel about the outcome, this is what free speech requires. So that's why I've personally avoided getting involved with the DEI issue. I mean, it's a tough thing to run a university. You've got to keep the donors happy, you've got to keep the government happy, you've got to keep students happy. And it's very weird because the people that are making a lot of decisions on campus are disconnected from that. We do a student satisfaction survey, and then we do it every 2 years. And it's very interesting. Yet if you look at what's making people unhappy, it's things like individual faculty advisors not advising well, or dining executives shortchanging the latitude of the dining program or something. And there's no feedback like there is in private industry. In private industry, if all of a sudden the dining division made a terrible customer service miscalculation, there'd be hell to pay. If all of a sudden the pilots go out on strike because they're very unhappy with working conditions at the airline, there's hell to pay. A university is uniquely unfocused in that there's no immediate feedback loop between good decision making on the ground, keeping the different constituencies satisfied, and allocating resources. It's just all completely throwing mud on the wall and seeing what sticks. Okay. Any other concluding remarks?
You were talking about having more sophisticated arguments. I totally agree with that. And we were talking about intellectual diversity, and I was saying that I don't think diversity is the problem. I think it's the lack of intellectual.
It's a
real
and
problem.
the plight
And,
is-
and what you're talking about, perhaps a set of rules that enhance intellectual exchange can enhance intellectual exchange. Maybe those kind of rules may be useful.
But you also have to have the feeling, the faculty and everybody has to have the feeling that the people in charge are not threatened by ideas. That you should be able, and I've always felt this, that you can go to the president of the university and say, look, Mr. and Ms. President, I feel strongly that Cornell should do this rather than this, or I'm very concerned about this problem. And then rather seeing you as the enemy who should be tarred and feathered, they engage with you intellectually. And I think generally most of the presidents I've lived through in my life, that's been the case. No one's booted me out of the door yet. Okay, well, thank you again for this.
Thank you.
Do you want to turn off the recording yeah, and appreciate you taking the time.
How was it? Recording off, we can hear the real news.